Welcome to Bald Guy DIY. In this video, I'm going to share with you my recent river floating adventures with my family and give you some pro tips so that you can make your own DIY floating experience a great success. Because of all the complications this year with the COVID pandemic and the restrictions on travel, things like that, some of the things that we hoped to do this summer had to be put on pause, canceled, or moved till next year. So this year I was looking for things that we could do a little closer to home and maybe take advantage of things that we don't normally do. A few years ago we went and enjoyed some river tubing with a company that provided that service about an hour away from where we live. And so I thought that would be great, but wouldn't it be awesome if we could do it on a large floating island instead, like we had seen other people try in the past. In this video I'm going to share with you our adventures out river floating. And also, if you stick around to the end, I'm going to share with you 5 important pro tips that I learned in this whole preparation and execution of the plan. Our trips turned out great, but I could see multiple ways that it could have gone a lot worse. And so I'm going to share with you best practices so you won't have those same issues yourself. I bought a nice sturdy floating island at Costco for about $180. And as you can see on the box, I look a little bit different from the people featured there, mostly because none of them are bald. And maybe because that guy's stomach and my stomach look a little different. But it's a quality product. It's important that it's reinforced in certain places. It says that it has extra shielded protection, although this particular one is not river rated. I have seen a lot of people just take the cheapest possible air mattress or inflatable out on the river, and I'm always a little leery to see that because some of them are pretty thin. This definitely is a quality product. It's rated for 6 adults and 1,200 pounds total, so I know it's going to be just fine to take my family down the river. I took it out of the box at home, and as you can see, it's amazing how tight they can pack it from the factory, but as you unroll it all out and stretch it out, it is quite big. It takes up about 13 feet in length and about 6 feet wide, and I blew the whole thing up on my driveway just to make sure that it was going to be good. It's always good to test things out before you get to the river and find out that there's something missing or something that you didn't account for. So on the last holiday weekend, we headed out to a local river, only about 20 minutes from our home. We traveled in 2 cars to the destination where we were going to offload from the river, and then we took 1 car for the rest of the way to the place where we were going to launch our floating island onto the river. It was a cloudy day and there was rain in patches. On our way to our launch spot, we actually had to drive through some almost torrential type rain, but when we got there, it was just misting slightly and a little overcast with some hope that it was going to clear a little later on in the day. I previously planned the route very meticulously and found that it was going to be about 23 kilometers in total. We had done a much shorter test float on the same river from different locations the week before, and so I was able to calculate it should take about 3 to 4.5 hours in order to complete it, just depending on the flow and the different switchbacks to the river. After arriving at the launch site, we were able to inflate the floating island, get all of our stuff together, and launch within about 15 minutes, which is very efficient, I found. The first time I tried to blow this up, it took almost an hour. So about 9:30 in the morning, we launched the floating island and we set off on our path. We'd never done this particular stretch of river before, so we weren't quite sure what the perils were, although we had checked pretty carefully with Google Maps to see what historically the shallower and narrower areas of the river were. The river where we traveled was very free of debris. The river's been high this year because of a lot of rain, and so there wasn't really any danger of snagging the raft on anything or running aground. The river that we used is typically fairly shallow and slow moving, and so there are places where it has a lot of sandbars, but for what we were doing, we didn't run into any issues throughout the whole trip. One of the biggest challenges when you're floating a new stretch of river or a river you're not familiar with is just how the currents will take the raft and turn it and twist it, and to which bank it's going to push the raft, and also depending on the wind. We found that in certain stretches we did have to paddle more than we would have liked, but as we got a little bit better at anticipating which way the current and the wind were going to take us, it became easier to do some kind of preventive paddling instead of having to do the more aggressive paddling to save yourself from running into the bank. One of the more complicated things that using a large floating island like this presents instead of a river tube is that it has much more surface area and it doesn't float in a way that really moves with the contours or the shape of the craft like a boat would. So you do have to turn it around quite a bit or give a little paddle here or there to straighten it out. if you want to be heading in the same direction all the time. If you don't mind twisting and turning as you go, then you don't have to do as much paddling. We took food along with us in a cooler, and we ate snacks as we went, had refreshments. Of course, it's always important to have a lot of bottled water or beverages so that you're not going to get dehydrated. And it was an overcast day, so we didn't have to worry about as much direct sun. We'd also been out a few times already this year, so we didn't need to put sunscreen on or slather like we might usually have to do. For the most part, it was sit back and relax. A great time to have family time for 4 hours as we floated along, making jokes, listening to music, and just overall enjoying the scenery of being outdoors in the summer, which always seems like it's too short as it is. As I'm sure with most things like along a riverbank, there was a lot of variation in the land around us, a lot of really flat areas where you could easily have beached the craft in order to have a picnic or rest or use the bathroom, and also a few areas with steeper banks, which wouldn't have been very good for getting off and stretching your legs, but was wonderful for the sake of admiring the scenery and really just seeing how beautiful the area really is. In the middle of summer, the grass is green, flowers are blooming, crops are coming in on the fields beside us, and it was a great experience. I love looking at the riverbanks and seeing all the different striations of the different layers of dirt, and so even just seeing some of those things was pretty interesting, and seeing how nature has formed over all of these years. We really only stopped one time to rest, and that was mostly just to use the washroom and stretch our legs a little bit. This island is so large that you're not cramped or stuck in a particular position for very long. You really have the flexibility and the stability to move around a little bit, change positions, and really be as comfortable as you'd like to be. Of course, it's inflatable furniture. It's not like being on plush furniture at home, but it is very comfortable and easy to get yourself in a position that you can stay in for quite a long time. We like to use the little climbing raft that comes with it to plug the area where the mesh is, just so that we don't always have to have our feet in the water, as the river water does tend to come into that mesh area, and it's just nice to be able to set them on a dry spot instead. If you need to cool off, of course, that's always an option for you too. Lots of drink holders on this raft, lots of room for food, clothes, all the accessories that we need. We already put forth the idea of throwing a tent on there and spending a few days on the river just for something a little more adventurous down the road. Our 23-kilometer trip took about 4 hours and 15 minutes. Our destination was at a provincial park, and so there were people on the shore as we arrived, some people fishing. If you're on the river, make sure not to go too close to the shore because you're going to interfere with people's fishing lines. We had a close call once on a previous float, and it's a little frustrating for everybody involved. As we came in, there was lots of flat area, which we had scoped out before, and it made for an easy disembark from the raft. We deflated it right there on the shore on a nice rocky area with smooth river stones so that it wasn't going to get all muddy. And once it was fully deflated with our vacuum, we were able to pack it all up nice and neat and tight, put it in the vehicle, and have everything ready to go for the next time. It was an awesome day. Can't wait to get out the next time. I have a feeling it's right around the corner. After a few of these DIY floats, let me share with you 5 very important best practices or pro tips that you can put into practice in order to get the very best river floating experience for yourself. The first pro tip is to make sure you plan and plan and plan before you set out on your journey. The very essence of river floating is that you don't have a motor, you aren't active paddling all the time, and so there's a lot of things that you can't control in the experience, such as how fast the river is moving and how long it's going to take to get to your destination. You don't want to have to paddle frantically for hours in order to get somewhere because you mistimed the flow of the river. A great way to make sure you understand how fast the river is moving and how long the journey is going to take is to do a test float of a shorter stretch of river on the same river at about the same time of the year, so that you understand how much water there really is and how fast it's going to take you to get to your longer destination. For me, I planned out everything that I did using Google Maps, and as you can see here, you can plot the locations that you have, and then you can actually measure the distance along that route and select exactly where you're going and how long it's going to be. Our test float was about 3.5 kilometers in the Devon area, and it took us between half hour and 45 minutes to do that float, and we did 2 different runs. I extrapolated that to my longer float of 23 kilometers and found that it should take about 3.5 to 4 hours. It ended up taking 4.25 hours, And sometimes that's just because different stretches are a little slower moving than we think, or because of other factors such as taking a little break or maybe getting caught up along a bank or something like that. So it's very important to plan out your route ahead of time. Make sure you know how long it's going to take to get there. And there's so many horror stories of people that just throw themselves in the river and then find out they don't know where to get on the river, they don't know where to get off the river, and it takes so much longer than they expected to that they end up getting stranded and need to be rescued by search and rescue. Don't let that happen to you. Make sure you plan your route well in advance. The second tip is to make sure you visit the launch and destination points. It might seem simple when you're using Google Maps, like I did, to use the satellite imagery and simply follow along the riverbanks and find spots that look like they'd be really useful and accessible for the sake of river floating. However, when you actually visit those sites, you find out that the topography and the elevation of the land is quite a bit different than the way it looks on that flat map. And so it's important to visit those sites and get an idea for how steep the banks are, how accessible it really is, how muddy or how rocky the area is, and the kind of hazards that are going to exist there. If you make a mistake and you can't get on or off the river, it's going to be a very difficult situation, again, possibly needing to call for help or get search and rescue to come and find you. Another really important factor in visiting those sites is that you may want to mark the location of your destination site if it's not completely obvious to you by using some kind of colored ribbon or spray paint or something else depending on the area and what's allowed, just so you'll know when it's time to get off the river. I was very careful to follow along with the GPS on my phone, and if you're not going to have cellular access or cellular connectivity while you're out there, it's important that you use the offline map feature and create that offline map where the GPS will still show you where you are on the river. This is really important to know when you should get off, because if you don't, often it can mean the difference between many more hours of floating and a lot of unpredictable circumstances. The third tip, and probably the most time-saving of them all, is not to rely on any kind of inefficient pump method. I knew this was a very large craft that we were going to be inflating. It's over 13 feet long and about 6 feet wide. And so I definitely knew I didn't want to be sitting there with the pump, manually pumping up that craft. I did think it would be acceptable to use one of those 12-volt inflator motors that you can get that are used for air mattresses and things like that plug right into the lighter socket on your vehicle. But after buying one and testing it out, I found that it took over 50 minutes to fully inflate this floating island, which was a very long time to be standing around at your launch site waiting for something to get done. In collaboration with my neighbor, I tried using 2 of them, but again, it would still take 25 minutes. And then he suggested something which turned out to be the magic bullet for this whole thing, and that is to use the blower end of a shop vac. Now, our neighbor had the DeWalt shop vac that's cordless, which worked perfect. I slapped in one of my 20-volt DeWalt batteries, and it worked fantastic in order to inflate the entire raft in about 5 minutes. That's right, only about 5 minutes for something that takes 50 minutes or 10 times longer using one of those 12-volt pumps. I can't stress how much I would recommend it so strongly because it makes the whole process so much more efficient. It also works great to deflate the raft when you're all done, which makes it pack much nicer and easier into the vehicle and makes storage much simpler as well. Take a shop vac of some kind, whether you use a generator to power a corded one, or you have some kind of inverter for your vehicle, or you have a cordless DeWalt one like I did, which worked great. Thank you, DeWalt. Make sure that you take something that's going to inflate the raft much more quickly and deflate it. That'll get you doing what you want to do faster and spending so much less time on the preparation. The fourth tip is a simple one, but it makes a huge difference. Even though you're floating along, you are going to need to be able to paddle and direct the island at some point. So it's important to use some paddles. I went to the local Canadian Tire, which besides tires stocks a bunch of summertime equipment, and found a kayak paddle which was double-ended but came apart in different segments, and I simply used both halves of it as 2 different paddles. It worked great, and we were able to steer our craft and also move it away from the banks and get to our destination whenever we needed to. A little bit of effective paddling goes a long way, so you don't need to paddle all day long. Not having to use your hands or something else to paddle yourself along impromptu is a lot easier and a lot less stressful when you're trying to get to a particular part of the river. And finally, as the last tip, make sure you use technology to your advantage. I already mentioned how you can use Google Maps to map out the location of your route and to make sure that you know where you're going, how far it is, and so that you're completely aware of the conditions. But it's also important to take advantage of the things that you can do to keep yourself safe, and that includes following along the GPS in your phone to make sure that you know where to get off the river. Another great thing you can do is share your location with a loved one or friend who's not out with you floating that day, so that they know where to find you if anything goes wrong and you do need rescuing. Even if you've planned everything out perfectly, you never know when there could be an incident of medical distress or anything else that could go wrong. And so it's important to have a backup plan if you need to get off the river unexpectedly. I also found an app that uses the GPS in your phone to display your speed, and that's perfect on the river to give you an estimate of how long it's going to take to get to your destination. It's not perfectly accurate at the slower speeds of river travel, but it gives you a better idea than simply staring at the banks and wondering how fast you're going. It gives you some peace of mind and also helps you plan for how long it's going to take to get to your destination. There are many, many other things that you could do with technology, mainly your phone, having a video camera and a camera along to keep track and to take those memorable moments. But definitely include technology in your plan and make sure you know how to use it best in order to maximize the safety and effectiveness of your trip. I hope you've enjoyed this little glimpse into our successful and fun floating adventure, and I hope that if you have a desire to river float yourself in the future, you'll take some of these best practices and have the best outcome possible. Part of DIY is always trying new things and experiencing new adventures, and so even though this isn't a project video, I hope it's something that you can enjoy and inspire your creativity for something you'd like to try yourself in the future. If you enjoy our videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. Tell your friends and family about it. We always love to see new faces emailing, commenting, and subscribing. Check back every week as I post a new video every Saturday morning. And if you'd like to send me a comment or an email, my information is in the description below. Until next time, wherever your adventures cause you to drift along, don't be afraid to be bolder.